Welcome to our Turing-Roche Knowledge Share series. The aim of these monthly events are to bring together members of the Turing and the Roche networks and the wider scientific community to hear partnership updates, different perspectives on topics in data science, and build new connections. This is actually our 2-year anniversary this month of running these events, which is very exciting, mainly just to me. But you can catch up with all our previous recordings of our events on our Turing-Roche YouTube channel. I'm just going to share some slides just to give you a bit of background on the partnership. So hopefully you can all see that. Great. So the clue is in the name with the partnership. It's between the Alan Turing Institute and Roche. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with at least one of them, but just some background information if not. So the Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI. Our partnership sits under our health programme, and Roche is a global pharmaceutical company. They have a long-term interest in personalised healthcare, and they have a growing number of academic partnerships, which includes the Turing. And we launched our strategic 5-year partnership together in June 2021. And this is our partnership North Star, which is our kind of guiding aim for the 5 years. So ultimately, we're collaborating to explore this term, patient and disease heterogeneity, through advanced analytics. So put more simply, why patients respond differently to treatment, and why diseases manifest in different ways in different people. Obviously, this is quite broad, so we're tackling this through a stepwise iterative manner, which you can see illustrated on the right-hand side of the slide, with a main focus on developing methodology. We're about halfway through our 5-year partnership, and we have focused our research into 3 different research themes staggered across the 5 years. So our first theme is structured missingness. We funded 2 18-month projects in this area. Both of these projects actually did a knowledge share in the last 2 months. So again, you can catch up with those on our YouTube channel. Our second theme is predictive modeling, where we funded 1 18-month project on fairness, and we'll be hearing some work from that project from our speaker, Leandra, today. And we have 2 postdocs working on other projects within this predictive modeling theme as well. And our final theme is multimodal analysis. This theme began this year, and our postdoc for this theme is currently investigating the Cancer Genome Atlas dataset for a potential project alongside Turing data wranglers. Our core partnership team is pictured here with representatives from Turing and Roche, and then this is expanded out with researchers that we funded, Turing enrichment students that we've taken on, and our cohort of community scholars. You can find out more about who's involved in our partnership network on our webpage. And also a key part of the partnership is wider connections and collaborations we want to build. So it's really critical for us to be running events like these to get you all involved. As I mentioned, our theme for today is fairness in AI for health. So this is a really key concept for the partnership. We're exploring this within our predictive modeling theme. So I'm really excited to have a knowledge share session on this today. So I'm delighted to welcome our speakers, Leandra Bräuninger, who is a PhD student at University College London, and Adarsh Srivastava, Head of Data Analytics and Quality Assurance at Roche. As mentioned, we'll be hearing from both of them, and then we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A box as we go. You can ask a specific question to an individual speaker, or you can ask a question for both to answer. And actually, just before I hand over to Leandra, we're just going to briefly hear from my Turing colleague, Julia Tomba, who in very coincidental timing is actually running a survey on fairness in health AI, which we would love for you to complete. So Julia, I think you're just going to briefly introduce that for us.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Vicky. Yeah, as she mentioned, given today's topic, I just wanted to take the opportunity to advertise actually this kind of project we have been running in collaboration with the Queen Mary University, the Turing-Roche Partnership, and AIM-RSF, which is the AI for Multiple Long-Term Conditions Research Support Facility. We are trying to understand what people think about the fairness of AI tools in healthcare and what they think might influence it the most. So like we have developed with some members of the public a survey which takes about 20-30 minutes to complete. And we are very keen to try to reach as diverse an audience as possible. So like I thought I would take the opportunity to present it here as well. If you're happy to complete it, or especially like if you're in touch with any PPIE groups which you think might be happy to be involved, if you could please like let us know or get in touch with about that. The basic information, like there is no previous knowledge required because like we give a brief overview about what AI is, how it can be applied in healthcare. The responses are all anonymous, and unfortunately the only bad bit is that there is no compensation given, which I know it can be like a bit of a deterrent. But yeah, if there are any questions, please feel free to get in touch. Like my email address is at the bottom, but I will also post it in the chat now in case. And that's it, I would say. If anything like comes up, please do let me know. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Vicky.
No worries. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, definitely post a link to the survey in the chat and then everyone can access. And with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand over to our first speaker, Leandra.
All right, yeah. So I'm Leandra Bräuninger, as Vicky already mentioned. I'm a PhD student at UCL. And my PhD project, my research field really is what we're talking about today. So I am investigating computational methods for fairness in medical and healthcare AI. And that is a really, really broad topic, and we'll get into that a bit more in just a second. I'm just going to mention that my PhD is funded by EPSRC, and the work today, or some of the work that I'm presenting today, is done with collaborators both at UCL and at Turing through the Turing-Roche partnership that Vicky mentioned, and that we're here today. But also, I just wanted to mention to all of the attendees that I'm actually really, really happy that you all came, and that shows a lot of interest in this topic that I am personally very passionate about. And I think everyone should be, so this is great. So what we are talking about today is an intersection really of three somewhat separate topics. So we're talking about health, we're talking about fairness, and we're talking about AI. And AI already is a really tricky little term because it can mean a lot of different things, and people use it in a lot of different ways or to mean different things. So in medical, and what I'm describing here is this kind of overlap of fields here on the bottom right. In the medical fields, there are different decisions that can be made in different ways, and a lot of them can be supported through AI or through AI adjacent kind of systems, as I like to call them. And with this comes a lot of considerations that we need to take. So the question here really is why do we need fairness in medical AI or fairness in AI for health? And as I said, there are a lot of different decisions within the medical AI field. Not all of them are medical, not all of them are clinical, but all of them are health related. For example, we can think about logistics. So that would be, for example, bed allocation within a hospital. Those can be automated, those can be AI supported. We can think about evaluating or modeling the effect of certain policies on the spread of malaria, for example. Or we can also think about maybe in the more stereotypical sense of healthcare AI in diagnostic decision support through AI. And in all of these examples and in all of these topics, fairness can come into the question, because we want to try and treat everyone in a fair manner. And that is another word, fairness is another word that has a lot of different meanings and has a lot of words that can be used somewhat similarly, but not all of them mean exactly the same thing. And I've added a little comment here at the bottom. In this talk, I'm using a lot of these words. One of them is social bias, one of them is fairness or unfairness, and one of them is equity and inequity. They all have nuances, and the nuances are extremely important, but for the purpose of this talk, I will be using social bias, inequity, and unfairness somewhat interchangeably. Now, why do we care about it specifically in the health domain? Because this could be a question that is important in all of the social spheres of humans. This could be, we could be talking about the labor market, we could be talking about politics, agriculture, whatever it is, whatever humans do, we could talk about fairness and unfairness. But why I think it is really important to look at specifically in the healthcare setting is that when these AI systems and automated decision-making systems that we apply exacerbate existing social bias and unfairness in the healthcare system, that can really lead to a matter of life and death. Where in other areas, discrimination occurs and is a problem that we need to fix. Within the health domain, is the consequences are so dire that we need to take care of them now. And a really good example of that was what is now a really famous case study. During COVID, a lot of press came up around this topic, and this was for a clinical measurement of blood oxygen that developed or that was not equally effective for people of different skin colors, and it was used as if it was equally effective for everyone. And that in COVID specifically really led to higher numbers of death within people of the color. So this is really an important topic, and I think the fact that you are here probably means that you understand this. And my research and the research of the partnership is really in trying to change this. Now, okay, I've convinced you all that this is important. I've convinced my funders that they should give me money to do this research. But the question then really becomes how? How do we do this? How do we tackle this massive, massive complex problem? This interdisciplinary problem that is quite fiddly around different edges and different ways of even conceptualizing this. So how I will approach this talk today is actually really, really high level. I will be talking about the concepts of fairness and how we can think about that within this specific overlap of disciplines. And then I will describe a short use case, but just be prepared for a lot of high level discussion here. So when we approach the concept of fairness within health, and specifically within AI for health, the last years have seen a bit of a development into formalizing this. And one of the main useful outputs, I would say at least, from recent literature has been this model development pipeline by Chen et al. And this describes the different steps that are involved in developing a model that then comes to use in the healthcare setting. And as you can see, there are 5 different stages to this. And at each of these stages, social bias can influence the end output. And this is especially important because a lot of people before this work used to think that mainly maybe the data collection had an effect on the final output, or that the model itself was actually value neutral and wouldn't perpetuate or at least not exacerbate any bias. But here it becomes really apparent that within each of these stages, social bias can have an effect. So even the way that we think about problems, the way that we prioritize different problems has an effect on the overall discrimination within populations, and especially within global populations. I'm not going to go into all of the detail here because there's more. And this is a massive, massive table that I use, for my own understanding. And this top level of this, let's call it a matrix, is the same as in the model development pipeline before. So we have all of the same different stages here, split up a bit more specifically into subcategories. And then we have another axis to this, which is what I call the 3 pillars of bias mitigation. And for these 3 pillars, there is the bias definition, the bias measurement, and the bias mitigation. And we'll go into the importance of this. But just to say that there is, so where we are in the context is we are trying to develop a model for example, for use in a clinical diagnostic support system. And we are really, the end goal would be to think about each of these steps. So think about the preparation step, think about the data step, the model development, and then the deployment step. And currently what I would say is mainly being done is that the public really focuses on regulation. And that really is just a reactive part to failing models. And the way that we as researchers can try and mitigate this is by looking at the whole system and trying to develop more robust and more fair models as a whole. And with that comes this layered approach of the definition, the metrics, and the mitigation. But these can be applied at each of these stages and should really be applied at each of these stages. So as I said, these pillars are intertwined, and another really, really important aspect of this is that we should always be aware of the context of any problem that we are trying to solve. And that means both specific context of what does it actually mean to be fair in this concept, in this problem, which I'll go into in the bias definition area, and also where is it situated within the larger societal problem setting. Do we only solve problems that we talk about increasing the fairness by a lot, but only for a small amount of people overall, or do we actually have a bigger impact by having a small impact on a small improvement on our little problem, but that actually affects a lot of people in the end. So within these 3 pillars, the first one is the definition pillar. So we should define what we mean by fairness. And that, as I said earlier, is not an easy approach. There are a lot of different ways to do this. We can talk a lot about equity and equality. For example, in the pulse oximeter example that I gave earlier, using the same output equally across all subpopulations didn't mean equal treatment for everyone, because there was a biological difference that was neglected in the interpretation of this signal. Whereas in other situations, the same approach could mean actually harmful discrimination instead of useful disaggregation. And that for the definition of fairness, there really isn't, there is no general approach. There is no one way to define fairness that always is applicable to every problem. It really needs to be looked at the problem setting itself and defined within those constraints. There are also different ways to approach when you are looking at your problem. There are different ways to approach the fairness definition. You can look at group fairness, treating groups the same, or you can look at individual fairness, where you're trying to treat similar people similarly. But there is a lot of literature within the social sciences on this, and this should be applied within algorithmic fairness as well. That then brings us to the bias metrics, and which has really been the focus of a lot of the algorithmic fairness community over the last couple of years. So you define your fairness, and then from that you move on and you look at your model, you look at your data and say, for that fairness definition, my model is this amount of fair or unfair. It either treats people fairly or it doesn't, but also by how much, and then we can compare. This is an important part of the work, and it really highlights differences, especially because for a lot of time, people have assumed that AI solutions and model approaches, mathematical approaches, were value neutral, so that they wouldn't exacerbate social bias problems, and that an output of a mathematical system can only can never be biased in a social way. That we now know to be untrue, so we can really measure it along different axes. And then the last point, which really should be the goal step, is to mitigate that bias that we find within the model, we find it within the system or the data. But that cannot happen in isolation. This can only happen as when we have defined our bias definition, and we have measured it, and then we can mitigate for it, and then we can measure again and see how much better we have done. Now, for a little bit more flavor, because this is all very abstract and not very useful, I think in isolation, I'm going to talk a bit about a use case. And as I said earlier, I've been doing some work with the Turing-Roche partnership on essentially a bias metric project, which is called uncertainty quantification with conformal prediction as a tool for fairness in genomic medicine. Those are a lot of words, and we're doing a lot of different things, but to get into the specifics of it, within breast cancer, there is a clinical decision tool that is applied and has been applied for years, that essentially gives an indicator whether hormonal therapy will be useful for a patient or not so useful. And that is that score exists because there are biological differences that determine whether or not whether this treatment will be effective for a patient, and the transcriptomic profile of a person can define this reaction. This score that we are using is called Oncotype DX. As I said, it's a widely used score, and clinicians make decisions on whether to treat a person based on this or not. So from the Cancer Genome Atlas program, the TCGA dataset, we used a subset of data that is the breast cancer subset, which has these transcriptomic profiles and ethnicity categories, amongst many other categories that are really useful for evaluation. So then the question that we tried to answer was, are the scores equally certain for all subpopulations? And why we are talking about certainty here is we're not looking at whether they are equally accurate, but we are trying to look if can we be sure in our predictions, can we be sure in our recommendations, and if these models are trained on data that is not representative for everyone, then our models might be skewed into one direction. And even though we might have a prediction for everyone, and we can always give out for a new patient a new score, we might not have the same certainty for all of them. And this really means that we are placing, with this project, we're placing ourselves into this little category here in the model evaluation and the bias metric category. That means that we are not looking at the model itself. We're not fixing the model itself. This is a post-hoc model evaluation tool. And we are just measuring whether there is a difference between subgroups or not. We're not mitigating anything. And the results did show that there are slight differences across subpopulations, which is interesting of itself, but this was expected and is occurrent in a lot of models that are currently used. But what it really showed was that it is useful to have as an output of a model, not just the personalized prediction, but also the personalized uncertainty. And because the tool that we used here is conformal prediction, that provides a personalized uncertainty metric. So for each person with the score comes not just a population level uncertainty, but actually an individualized uncertainty metric. Which then means that the clinician who decides whether this new patient gets treated for breast cancer with hormone therapy or not can look at, okay, maybe the score is really high, and I would suggest that the person gets hormone therapy, but actually the uncertainty for this person is really, really high, and I might take another test, or I might look at people within the same subpopulation, or I might just have a bit more personal intuition on this one. And so for clinician in the loop systems, this can be really, really helpful. Whereas when the uncertainty is really low, the doctor can trust the system and just wave it through. But when the uncertainty is really high, then the doctors can give a little bit more nuance for a system. And this is, while it is a metric project, it can have a mitigating effect for some problems because it is in the end treating an imperfect world. As I said, a lot of bias does exist in current medical models. A lot of bias does exist in the ways that people are treated within the healthcare system. But being explicit about the bias that does exist and the bias that and the certainty of the outputs that we create can already mitigate some of that underlying bias by just informing all of the people, both the patients and the clinicians, about the fact that there is uncertainty even, and that there is bias. So just to wrap up, in order to not overrun too much, the project that I did was a very quick and easy post hoc metric for personalized medicine. And while I applied it to a transcriptomic predictor, it can be applied to many different data sets and many different models. And I have a quite simple and documented code that is accessible through our Turing-Roche GitHub, and also a short report that describes exactly what the project tried to do and why and how exactly, because I wasn't able to go into a lot of detail here today. Just to wrap up, what is really close to my heart is, while this is a very specific project, is really looking at the bigger picture. So we are faced with a systemic problem, and only systemic solutions really can help this. So while this is while measuring the bias that we have is important, it's important to then use that insight to really mitigate for the problem and look at the whole system of the development of this model. Where does the bias seep in? How can we be more transparent across all of these layers? And where do we mitigate against this? Do we fix something in the model itself? Do we fix something in the way that we deploy it? Are we more, do we adapt the model afterwards? There are a lot of different options, and really a systemic and context-aware solution is, I think, for me, the way forward. And with that, thank you very much for listening. And if you want to hear more about this, if you want to hear more specifically about the conformal prediction project, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's more info on the GitHub, or will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leandra. That was great. We will now swiftly hand over to Adarsh.
Okay, so good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Adarsh Srivastava, based out of India, Pune, and I'm working in Roche for 3 years now to build this AI ethics as a competency in the organization. And Leandra laid out lots of different aspects of ethics, which we are working in the organization. But what I'm going to present today is the AI ethics principle, which Roche came up with. I'll explain how and why we developed this Roche ethics principles, and where fairness is one aspect of it. And then I'll try to deep down into the fairness aspect and see, and then I'll try to paint the ethics picture. So Leandra talked about more from the technical perspective. I'll try to paint more from the ethics, what exactly we mean as an organization, which is healthcare, working directly with patients and impacting patient life. What does it mean for us when we say fairness? So let me quickly take you all through why we develop the principles and what is the rationale behind it and how we did it. So we all know how complex the world of AI is becoming with the exponential growth of the technologies, and with the advent of LLM, it's going in a very different direction. So, and given this complexities, which is increasing day by day in AI systems, the ethical complexities are also increasing. And then there's a dire need. We realize that there's a dire need to establish a foundation ethical principle that aligns to the organization value which Roche has, the operating principles which we have. And we are set out to write up principles which can govern the design, development, and deployment of AI at Roche. And as Leandra clearly mentioned, that the fairness aspect, the ethics comes not as a reactive measure of auditing or assessment, but it comes with a proactiveness when we are designing an AI system or developing an AI system or doing the deployment as well, and even after the deployment as well. So the main objective, the aim of this document was to raise the awareness of ethical behavior and how in Roche, how we are designing an AI system, how we are coming up with a business problem, how we are developing it, and how we are deploying the AI solutions for the world. And how we did it, we did a benchmarking and collaboration, and then we, in Roche, because Roche is a huge organization spread across the globe and has different parts, we all came together as one team and start formulating and start brainstorming what should be the principles when it comes to ethics in AI for Roche. And we developed these principles, and then we got it reviewed by lots of internal diverse group and the expert leaders as well from various division of Roche, like pharma, diabetes care, FMI, and Genentech, and other aspect. And that is how we developed Roche ethics principle, and it was released last year in December for the world. I will quickly deep dive into the 11 principles which we have as Roche ethics principle. Most of them revolves around fairness, bias, but we wanted to give it a deeper understanding when it comes to ethics. And as Leandra mentioned, why it is very important to have fairness in healthcare, especially in healthcare, because we are dealing with the life of patients. But there's another aspect to it, and the another aspect is trust. And trust is more important for us, because if the patients don't trust the solutions and the AI enabled products which we are developing, if people don't trust, if the patient don't trust, there's going to be a harm. There's the a serious problem or a disease which we would have able to diagnose quickly and fix quickly would have been not possible if there's no trust between the patients and the customers on the AI system which we are developing here in Roche. And that is why all 11 principles revolve around the idea of building trust, fairness, transparency. I'll very quickly go through them. First is ethical use, and that is there's a reason why we wanted to mark this as first principle, because this is kind of supersede all the principles, where in one line what we are trying to do is to maximize the benefit of AI and minimizing harm. And this one statement suffice all the other principles, because in everything we do, every other principles which we follow, we have to make sure, and we are making sure that we are maximizing the benefit of AI and not making redesigning it for other purpose. Transparency, again, very important for the trust. We are transparent how we are using the AI to build trust and the credibility with patients and society as well. Explainability is also important in healthcare specifically, because if we are trying to diagnose a rare disease, let's say Alzheimer, okay, and we are deciding on a different medication for a patient, then patient needs to know why and how AI came to this prediction. So this is very difficult. It's not easy as it sounds, but we try to bring explainability as much as we can in the AI systems. Human control, human the loop kind of setup where we can override the decisions made by AI, and the autonomy by machine can be restricted to a certain level where the end decision has been taken by humans. Empowering people, enhancing the shared decision making of patients, care, and healthcare providers. It's more like we give power to the people we work with. For example, if we are doing a clinical trial and then we are using, let's say, AI solution to find out how we should do it, we try to involve as much people as we can to give them power to take the shared decision. Accountability, this goes back and connect to what Leandra was mentioning about monitoring, feedback, and governance actions. And then these needs to be operationalized. It's not only about deployment of AI into the real world. It's about monitoring whether it is drifted to a certain threshold, or are we taking the real-time feedback and then improving the system as we go into the real world, and is there a governance process to handle all these things? Sustainability, another very important aspect of our Roche AI ethics principles, because we as an organization try to reduce the carbon footprint in the world, and sustainability is generally go with the AI ethics principle, but we decided to keep it because what we consciously do is to make sure that we are optimizing all the AI solutions so that we can reduce the computing power or the storage space, and then we also think about how we can create a sustainable solution. Privacy, and then this is very important because privacy is one thing everybody's talking about in this world. What about my data? What is happening to my data? What will happen to my data? So we make sure that we follow a stringent process when it comes to data, which we are using for an AI model, for testing of the AI model and the training of the AI model. Same with the security, where we should have a robust structure where the AI system, where it is being developed or where it is deployed, is secure. Safety by design, safety kind of, we embed it into the design of the AI system. It's not something which we implement after developing an algorithm or a machine learning model. We try to create it in a way right from the very start in the agile structure, where we make sure that the safety is built into the application. And then last but not the least, the most important aspect is fairness and minimization of bias. And for us, the AI tool should be inclusive, equitable, and seek to support the mission of responding the needs of all patients. And that is one of the important aspects where we are working towards to make sure that whatever we do, what kind of AI we develop, we pick that proactive approach of building that inclusivity and equity into the AI system which we develop. I'll deep down a little bit in fairness and minimization of bias, but not from the technical aspect, but from the ethical lens. How we see as a fairness and minimization when it comes to ethics. It kind of integrated with bias, because if we need to have fairness, we have to minimize the bias. So these like interrelated entities. So fairness, it is fairness in an ethical principle that is linked to equity, and note this is not equality. So it is for fairness. When we say fairness, and if it is an ethical principle, it is equity. Fairness is also linked to justice. So and then all three of them together, fairness, equity, and justice, with all of them, it's bias which conflicts with all three of them. Bias conflicts with fairness, equity, and justice. So what we have to do is to avoid it whenever possible. And and there's a reason why I mentioned why I emphasized on equity, and it is not equal as to equality, because we have to consider the contextual feature of case, and then we take that conscious decision of taking the context of the features which we are developing to promote fairness. Not We should not follow one size fit all kind of method. We have to understand what is a context, what problem we are trying to solve with this AI solution, what exactly are we doing, where it will go. And bias, as Leandra mentioned, bias largely we when and then this in this landscape, when somebody says bias, we generally think about bias in a data. But I want to also put emphasis on, if we work with data with a biased mindset, that also creates a biasness in the system. And the bias training set, which is pretty obvious for an AI system. If you train an AI system with a bias training set, it will be biased. But the other aspect of ethical aspect of bias mindset is equally important. And because of the bias training set, because of the mindset which humans have, maybe it is biased, then the output will definitely be biased. And this is what conflicts with the Roche aim for patient centricity, because the idea Roche revolves around is how we can be more patient centric. So now this statement begs a question: what do we do? What exactly can we do to reduce, or to bring fairness, to reduce minimization, to reduce bias? And apart from all the technical aspects, apart from mitigating the risk of data set which is biased, identifying and then making sure that it has equal representation and there's no under representation or over representation of any particular set of data, there's another aspect which I want to put more emphasis on, is be reflective. Ethics generally, what people think is, now ethics is a very subjective thing, so it changes. But people generally see, and then from my own experience, I know I had discussion with lots of people saying that, yeah, I understand the importance of ethics, but it's going to delay my time to market for a product. Or why should I do it if there is no regulation around it? Or what will happen if I'm not following ethics in AI? But all these questions comes back to, we have to be reflective. We aim for speed, we aim to reduce the time to market for a product, but we generally do it without being reflective. And that is a very strong reflection, is very strong ethics tool, that give you kind of a safe space where you can sit and relax and think what we are doing and why we are doing it, and what can be the consequences. Is my swiftness in developing an AI solution and pushing it to the market will have any dire consequences which I should be aware of? And then all these things comes back when you reflect on what you are doing. And then it also push you and then make you realize that there is a bigger picture, where AI is not just a technology. There are social variables involved. There are people who develop it, people who use it, people who deploy it, people who are getting impacted by it. And then if you're not being reflective and thinking about what is going to happen when this product or this solution or this AI tool goes out in the world, that is where we tend to lose aspect of fairness and start inducing bias into the system. So what do? We ask yourself, is my work with data and AI building trust? is it building trust? Is it building trust with not only with the end users, but the colleagues I'm working with? Have I included a diversity and data practices in our work? If not, how can we make sure, how are we making sure that we are not introducing bias? And just to this point, in Roche AI ethics principles are not only one paper which we published. We also realized that there's another and a very important aspect of development of AI and ethics into it is data ethics. So we went ahead and actually developed two different papers. One is data ethics principles and one is AI ethics, because what we realize is maybe you are not working with an AI solution and say that if I'm not working with an AI solution, why does I have to follow ethical guidelines? But we also have to make sure that even if we are not using an AI system, if we are not working with an AI system, we are either consuming or generating data. And that is why we have to make sure, and then that is why we developed Roche data ethics principle as well, in complementary with the Roche AI ethics principle, to make sure that we are focusing on diversity and inclusiveness of data and how we are going to manage and mitigate the ethical aspects of data. And the last point, which I want to highlight, we generally miss it in a kind of a race to develop. We started thinking that we only need data scientists and engineers and biostatistician to develop an effective AI solution, which will do great things in the world. But there's another aspect of seeking help from an ethicist. They are the experts. They're trained to be to follow ethical guidelines. They know what needs to be done. And this is a very important aspect which I really found useful working in Roche and building this competency. We have a bioethics department where you can submit a consult and then just ask them, this is what I'm trying to do, can you tell me if it is unethical in any way? And then they help you. And then these ethicists is kind of expert into what needs to be done when it comes to data and AI, and then they try to bring everything together. That is, I think, it from my side about promotion and fairness. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Adarsh. That was great to see that kind of real world example and how it's kind of working in companies. We've got just about 8 minutes for questions now. I will kick us off as host privilege. So I guess my first question maybe for Adarsh was about, as you said, Roche is a huge company and it seems like these principles, it was good to kind of get them signed off by different departments. I wanted to ask if there was kind of any debate on that kind of definition of fairness, and something kind of Leandra touched upon as well, is that there is no kind of clear definition. So I just wondered if you had any kind of discussions around that.
Yes, we had lots of discussions, because as I mentioned in my presentation, the context is very important. So if somebody is working with a medical instrument and then they're just using a data coming out of an instrument, can say that, oh, this is the instrument data. How does it make a difference that whether I have to implement the ethical principles or not, right? But on the other hand, in some other department, there's one person who's working in a clinical trials and using an AI, then they definitely can think of. But what we came down to that if you reflect, if you start thinking, go back into the system, that yes, you are using a data which is getting generated by a medical instrument, but ultimately which data we are using? Is it coming from a sample which is being tested of a patient, and using which you are trying to identify something which you should not, or you are trying to predict something which is and then because you just have this caveat of saying that this is an instrument generated data, I can take the data and predict anything. Did you make sure that it will not ultimately affect the end users and the customers, right? So, and yes, there are lots of discussions, but one thing which we all agreed to, that we have to be very contextual and understand what exactly where we started, what is the business problem, and where it will go.
Right, thanks so much. And Leandra, I guess kind of following on from that, what are the kind of biggest misconceptions you find when you're talking to people about fairness? Is it that kind of regulations kind of box you put on one of your slides, or yeah?
I think there's a lot of things. The main thing is that there is a silver bullet that we can just do something and it will all be fixed. And I think, yes, the kind of regulation aspect definitely is an important thing as well. This kind of like single-mindedness of, oh, we're doing this, and then with this it will be fixed, and just regulating the systems will be enough. I'm not saying that regulation isn't important, by the way. That is definitely not what I'm saying, but it just should be more systemic. And I think actually, kind of on a meta level, one of the really big, not really misconceptions, but this kind of concept that we as the model developers, or we as the doctors, or whoever it is who is using the system, knows best what fairness would be. I think that is actually the biggest misconceptions. And I think these kinds of meta conversations, as Adarsh just mentioned, of like, what does fairness mean? But really also being influenced by the end, not the end user, because that in our case would be the doctor, but the patient. What does it mean to be treated fairly for a patient? When does a patient feel treated fairly? When do they feel like they have reached a treatment and an outcome that is personalized to them but not discriminatory? And there are a lot of things, especially as researchers, where we are kind of sitting in our little heads and thinking about these things very, very deeply. But if we don't talk to the real world and we don't interact with people who struggle through the really human consequences of these things, then we will never see the full picture.
Right, thank you. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. So Adarsh, the first one for you. So how might Roche's use of AI and principles affect the rest of the industry, or even with regulatory developments? I.e., is Roche aiming to be a thought leader in this space?
Yeah, actually, we wanted to be a thought leader in this space because what we see is there's a gap in understanding, and then Roche, when it comes to healthcare, is uniquely set up working with both pharma and dia aspect. And then we wanted to build a system. It is difficult because there are lots of moving parts, lots of things works in a different way. But what we're trying to do is to build that one umbrella where we can actually define what it, and actually uh, reduce the principle to action to actually show that, just like Leandra is working on building a tools for to identify the bias, right, and then create a matrix. We are trying to solve the problem for the whole industry. There are lots of other industry leaders who are actually doing great work, but till now, what I realize is it is the whole concept of ethics is at a very conceptual state, and the next step is, which is the most critical step of operationalizing it, is something where we are taking the lead and trying to solve this problem for the whole industry.
Great, thanks so much. We've got a big knotty question, which we will try and answer with the couple of minutes to go. So who and how determines when the benefits of AI on one group outweigh its unfairness on another? Or do you envisage that it's more likely that a minimum fairness must be met before AI is deployed? So Leandra, I don't know if you want to try and start us off with that one.
I could say something on this. Yeah, I don't have the conclusive answer, but I think something that I just mentioned before is really important here, to really be super context specific, ask the people that are affected by the AI system. I think that should always be the people who make these decisions. And I think on a bigger level, it should really be a societal discussion about how do we approach these things. As I said, a lot of fairness considerations and fairness concepts have been discussed in social sciences for decades. And we should really lean onto this scholarship in trying to answer these questions, even though they're now much more present maybe in our minds as researchers in this field. They're not the first time that we've come across it, and we shouldn't treat them as that. And I think really when it comes to the more specific decision on also the performance of systems versus the ethics of it, I really think there is a bit of a misconception there as well, that it always will be a trade-off. Because I think in a lot of ways you can also say, and I know that's not what this question is entirely asking, but in a lot of moments you can also say that the system actually gets better because it makes better predictions for a lot of people that before would have been not benefiting from that. But yeah, it's a really difficult societal question, I would say.
I think I'm going to have to cut us off for time, but I know we've got a couple of extra questions, and Adarsh, if you had a response for that, then we'll post that in the Slack,
Yes,
so our speakers can get to those questions there. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for our excellent speakers. I know there's a lot of food for thought.